Hello again. This is Mike Siver's show with No Fences. Again with Sherry and S. This is part 2 of Early Childhood. Early Childhood part 2. In the last show we talked a lot about the fences that young people build around themselves through whatever reasons they've realized. And we use an example of a young girl wanting to be skinny and she's already underweight. Because that's what she thinks. And you mentioned about all the shows and the commercials of young girls that are all trim and slim and looking pretty, and all the girls who don't look like that think I'll never be any good. They build their own fences until they're taught that beauty is inside. Or as they say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What do I behold about you that's beautiful? And if all I think about as a man is your outside extremities, well then my limited thinking is distorted as well, because you have to look at the whole person, and we all know that, and we try to do that. So what I wrote down here, and I know you and I talked, and you've got some stuff you want to say in just a minute here, but so many times in our lives, we subconsciously or unconsciously build our own fences around us. That has a very large impact on the kind of person that we may grow to become. Now, what I've put in here is a scripture from the Bible in Proverbs 30. I'm going to only read verse 8. And that is, remove far from me vanity and lies. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with food convenient for me. Now, to me that says, remove the vanity from me. Well, this young girl that we talked about is becoming very vain about her looks. And where will that take her in the future if she loses her looks in the prime of her life? Well, it could be for any reason whatsoever, but if she loses her looks or something happens, and how many women do you know, and that I know, that when they grow up and they get married and they have children, lose that figure during pregnancy, and a lot of them aren't able to get it back, and how that bothers them for years and years and years, until they accept the fact, oh, this is now how I am. They build that fence up around themselves, and it bothers them. Because I know I've talked to my wives who are like that. I've been married 3 times, and I know what it's like. So
I never got mine back. So.
I guess men don't have to worry about that too much. But where it follows on, it says, give me neither poverty nor riches, which means just, not that I might not earn some money to be rich, but I'm not going to be restricted myself to keep myself poor either. I mean, poor in a lot of cases is a state of mind. It's where you build around yourself. I'm from the other side of the tracks, so I'll never amount to anything. Only the people on the other side of the tracks amount to stuff. Myself and my family, we grew up with a single mom with 7 kids. We grew up poor. And we were state aid kids. We were state supported kids. Back then it was a little different. But we had talks, my sisters and I, about how we would, we're poor. We're going to stay poor all of our lives. And none of us did. We all ended up doing very well, but I think it was because of our mother, who didn't let us put boundaries on ourselves. Didn't let us restrict ourselves to doing anything. And feed me with food convenient for me. Well, give me the nutrition, to me, is spiritually and emotionally to feed me to grow, to help me grow, not to have me stuck in a situation or build a fence around myself. Now, I know there's a lot of other scriptures in the Bible I went through and looked and found that refer to vanity. That was the word I picked for this particular little girl and her situation, was because she was becoming vain on her looks, and she really was. So I picked that scripture, and I think that sort of suits what we were talking about on the show yesterday, or the last show we just did. Now, you have some stuff that you want to talk about.
You know, when you're building on fences, I was thinking during our little break that my mother and father, when I have 3 other siblings, as we were growing up, very young children, we were still grade school into high school, we had many fences. They had many fences, positive fences built around us. You know, we weren't allowed to run the streets by all means. We weren't allowed to be, to be outside running the neighborhood. We got up, we went to school, unless we had appointments, some of us, band practice, that sort of thing. Unless we had stuff like that to do after school, we were to come home from school. We were to get our homework done. I think we talked about this sort of thing,
Right.
You get your homework done. You're going to have dinner. You gotta make sure your clothes are laid out for school the next day. On and on and on. All positive things that I've carried on into my adulthood with my children. It was always positive for me. I didn't really have, I think I was worried as I was young, am I going to go to school? Am I going to be able to go to school? Because we didn't have a lot of money. My dad worked all the time. My mom worked some as we were growing up, and then she wasn't working. So, I was looking at a lower class situation. So I did. Yep. I had those worries. Am I going to be able to go to school? Am I going to be able to do this further in my life? Am I going to be able to take care of myself? Because we also had the fences built around us too that until we were much older, we weren't going into the store and purchasing foods, purchasing items like that. We weren't, I guess, thrown into the public situations as a young age. That was Mama and Daddy's responsibility.
Right.
And I carried that. I was a little bit more lenient on it, I think, with mine, because I did take mine into the store. And oftentimes, here, Mom will give you the money. You can pay for the groceries. I started teaching my kids at an earlier age. If you want these things from the store, you've got to pay for these. So I don't know. I guess I tried to avoid all those fences. I had a little problem, my kids at an early age wanted to do the makeup and the ears, piercing the ears. I remember telling my young daughter, when you're 18, you can pierce your belly button. I don't care what you pierce. But as long as you are still in school and under 18, no. I mean, I know there's just certain things, but I know there's parents out there, that don't do that for their children. But I tried.
Well, I want to make sure and clear that we talk about these fences we're talking about in this next series of shows we're going to do are not the behaviors that kids, we talk about that a lot too, about learned behaviors and how kids behave a certain way. That's not what we're talking about on the show. We're talking about fences that we build psychologically, that we don't see ourselves becoming anything. And I want to say a lot of times part of the fences that we hear about, and I'll use one example here, is our name. We know in our little town where we're from, there are certain names that mean certain things. There are certain names that have to do with wealth, because the residents of our town, and because it's such a small town, we pretty much know everybody. And the man who owns the bank, it's not like a big corporate bank, it's a private owned bank, lives in our town. Well, we know him. Also, the alcoholic dad lives in this town. Or dads who have got themselves in a little bit of issues and have been to jail or been to prison live in this town. You have the whole gambit in every town in the United States, but because we come from a very, very small town, we tend to know everybody. So how many kids, and we talked about this before, have to live up to your name, like the banker's children? His dad, my dad, owns the bank. Well, the expectations on that child are huge, which is fine, and maybe it needs to be. But what fences is that kid putting them around himself? I'll never be as good as my dad, or I'll never be able to do that on my own because he's going to leave me stuff. I haven't worked hard for all this stuff. They start to build fences in their head. Conversely, the young child of a alcoholic or a troublemaker in town or a fighter in the bars who gets in trouble, their children have to live down their name. So do you have to, as a child, live up to your name or down to your name? Live your name down. That's a huge fence, because you and I both know the name in the small towns, you know, people know you, oh, your name is this, or your name is that. I feel sorry for you. You know, your dad was, you know, hope you don't come up like your dad. Hope, you know, like me, not being as smart as my sister. I hope you don't come up like your dad. I hope, you know, you don't turn out like your dad. Or you'll be like your dad. If your dad's an alcoholic, you're going to be one too. Everybody knows alcoholic runs in families. Right there's a fence being built. And some kids accept that fence. Some kids say, no, I will never do that, and they never do. But what makes one kid accept it and one kid not accept it, I'm not really sure, because the parents teach them the same thing. One kid looks at something and says, I'm not going to do that, and the other kid looks at something and says, I'm going to do that. Why? It's hard when your family has a bad reputation in a lot of towns, because that's a fence that's being built by the community. And I don't think they mean to. I don't think they deliberately actually tell that child on purpose that you're going to become like your mom or like your dad. Your dad was no good, so you're going to be no good. Your dad was great, so you're going to be great. You know, your dad was a lawyer, are you going to be a lawyer? And these are fences that we build up. And then if we don't meet those fences as we grow, we start to have less value of ourselves. I can't amount to anything. I can't be a lawyer. My dad was a lawyer. I don't get it. You know, I don't know what I'm going to be, or I don't know what I'm going to become. Is anybody going to like me because I'm not as successful as my family name? So now we have the fence of the name being built. And then the fence of the education. Because I know when I went to school and you went to school, there were certain expectations of certain people with names. You're this and you're that, and they didn't have as high expectation of people with the questionable name. If you have a questionable name in a small town like that. The same thing applies to Kalamazoo or to Detroit or to New York. It's just that small towns, everybody knows everybody. So it makes it much harder to live down or live up to different names. And that's sad that we get ourselves in those situations. So I don't know if you've got anything that you want to go with that or follow with that, because your children have to follow in your name. And my children follow my name, but my children live overseas, so it's a whole different ballgame. They don't have any name to live up to or down, just behave themselves and they're going to be fine. They create their own fences. We, as adults, need to be more concerned about what the possible psychological fences we build around our children. And we never think about that. It's not something that's taught. It's not something that when you're taught as a child, or when you grow up, you can't teach your children this. You shouldn't let your children think this. You shouldn't let your children think that. We don't do that. That's not something that's taught, and that's something I would like us to start to consider. Even in the school systems, children, I mean, teachers are no different than anybody else. They're all human. And they do a wonderful job. 99% of them really earn their pay. A lot of them don't get paid as much as they should. And I support that 100%. But they also, I don't think, whether they don't have the means or the ability or they're not taught, to look at children who are struggling and why. And then the resources have to be there as well to be able to support that. But to recognize when children are struggling because of not necessarily their ability, but because of the walls that they're building around themselves. And I'll never be. And to have a teacher possibly hear a student say, well, I'll never pass these tests. Why would they say that?
I used to say that a lot when I was younger, but I went from I'm never going to pass these tests to I really struggle passing these tests. You know, I mean, I kind of changed up. Still don't think it made much difference. Right. I mean, I might have changed it up, but it all meant the same. I am not going to do well with these tests. I built that wall up around myself, and in fact, I still have that wall today.
Well, it's the same thing when I talked earlier on the other show we had about me being as good as my sister. Mm-hmm. And I never was told I was going to be as good as my sister. I was always worse than my sister. So in the end, I didn't even worry about passing tests. It didn't bother. It didn't bother me whether I passed the test or not, because I knew I never would. And then I left school in the 10th grade. Luckily, back then, you could get into the military service if you went and took the test and passed the test. You didn't have to have a high school education. Today you do. So I went into the service with a 9th grade education. Luckily, I got out of the service with a GED. But because I didn't have all that education, I built a wall around myself about what I could become. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate enough to get into an industry that was a high-paying industry worldwide. And I went into that and did that for a number of years. But when I started to realize that it was a young man's field, I was an oil field construction worker. I used to do diving all the time in that. And that's a young man's job. It's not an old man's job. So you either became the boss, which I never was going to become the boss because that's a whole different field, or you get laid off. You get fired. Mm-hmm. And because I knew I had I had a GED, but it was a 9th grade education, I didn't know what I was going to do. I started to worry. I had a house, I had a wife and 3 children. What am I going to do when I can't do this job anymore? And there was, to me, no future. I didn't have anything I could do. I was good with my hands, so I started to do things, and things worked out in the end. But in the end, I went back to school, which was a frightening experience for me, because of not finishing high school and all that stuff. I went back to school, and then it started to grow. And I loved the classroom after that. I did well in college, and I really liked what I was doing in school. But I had to get over that hump, and it took me 40 years to get over that hump. How many other people in that situation build that wall like I had and never get over it?
Me? Well, as I was talking up here, right now I'm trying to go to school for my master's in marriage and family therapy. Just 2 weeks ago, I kind of went into a panic. I don't know if I don't think I was feeling well. I was getting stressed out. I was ready to give it up. I was just ready to be done. I didn't want to do this no more. My brain was hurting. My feet were, my mind just needed a break.
Right.
I went to bed, left it alone for a couple days, and now I'm acing assignments. So I still have that fence, but not enough of a fence where I'm not going to do this at all kind of thing. But that wall, that fence is still built there after 54 years.
Right.
It is still there. It's letting up a little bit, but it's still there. Not totally blocked off. It squeezes back open every once in a while, lets me creep on and keep going. But yeah, I've had that wall all my life.
And it's when you built yourself.
It's when I built myself, yes.
And we do build them ourselves. I mean, I'm older now, and I have built fences around myself at my age.
See, that that wall should have been lifted the day I graduated high school.
Yeah,
My mother and my father, neither one, graduated from high school. So that wall was built at a very early age.
yeah.
You would have thought that that wall would have, oh, I graduated from high school. Then you would have thought, it didn't then, but then you would have thought, oh, almost 2 years later, I'm going to college. It should have been gone, but it wasn't. It has just always been there.
And why? That's the question we
I-
have to,
I just
you know.
don't know.
And I'm not really looking for an answer. Maybe
I don't
if you
know.
got one, we can take it. But why do we build these walls around us? And I think it has to do with our upbringing from the very young age. Whatever
Or what we see around us.
what we see around us, what we hear around us,
Mm-hmm.
what people say about us. And the walls we get built, especially today, because it's so visual today, is the racial walls. What walls do they feel are built around them? And what walls do, because of their upbringing with their parents, who might have gone through some horrible things growing up, what walls did they hear their parents talk about different things that they couldn't do or could do or wouldn't be able to do, or economic level that they may not be able to get to because of their race, whatever it is. How does that impact the children? We're never going to amount to anything.
The children end up with those same walls built.
Yeah,
The same fence, the same wall. I know many adults today that still have that wall around them. You know, the racist slurring that just continuously just rolls through generation to generation to generation. You know, I see many changes today as far as that not being the case,
right.
but it's still relevant today.
Well, I use the visual example in every town, but you can see it in our town especially,
Yes.
is the other side of the tracks. There's one side of the tracks where the village is on, where the shopping centers are and the main street is. That's on one side of the tracks. And the other side of the tracks, which is like 2 blocks away, the houses are half the cost, half the price.
Mhm.
A lower economic standard is in that area right after the tracks there, all the way, the whole length of it. You know what we're talking about.
Because I live on that side.
But you live farther
I
away
live
from
farther away, but
you-
it's still on that side of the track.
Yeah, but on the other, where you live, further down the road from where you live, and where you live is far enough away from the tracks, the values are going back up.
Yep, a little bit.
They are going back up. It's that area within about 2 blocks, 3 blocks of the tracks, where it's very interesting, because that's the wall that's built there. It's an invisible wall, but it's there. And I would really venture to say, if you were to go and interview and knock on doors down that side of the tracks and get their story, what they perceive themselves to be, and how their perception of their future looks to them, then going back on the other side, on the village side of the tracks, and knock on the doors on that side, the stories are going to be totally different.
Totally different. Yeah, I
And
agree.
and they all live within 2 blocks of each other.
Mhm.
They'll be totally different because of the wall that's built from the other side of the tracks. And I knew that saying when I was a kid. I didn't apply it to anything. It was just a saying. You're poor on that side, we're rich on this side. That's as far as I thought it went. But I didn't know why it went to that, when it went like that. So it was a situation that didn't come around till later, and I understood what that meant. It was a wall. And a lot of people never grow past that to be able to buy a house on the other side of the tracks. Now, some of them don't want to, and that's fine too. But we build these walls up around our villages and our people and our individuals and the schools.
And the very young children see this wall, and it just continues and continues and continues. When or at what point is the cycle broken?
You know, in every individual, I think that's different, but I believe it starts young. When we teach our children that there aren't walls, that the walls that we have are created. You're not doing well in school maybe because of the way that you're being taught. Sometimes we have to be taught a little different. We learn a little different than, you learn a little different than me. You focus on one part that brings things into perspective. I may focus on another part that brings the same thing back into perspective, but we come at it from two different angles. We don't learn that till we get older. And I know if I try to learn what you're learning now, your way, I won't do it. I'll do it the way I understand it. Whether I read the book from the back to the front or from the front to the back, I'll get the story and I'll get it and I understood. How do we teach kids in their early childhood that there are no fences? We build our fences. We create our fences. How many people out there, and I'm going to do my homework so I can have some information on the next show about people who were born into poverty become successful people and why. And there's a reason for that. And I believe it starts with the parents. In most cases, not all cases, but in most cases, I believe it starts with the parents encouraging the child to learn, and grow.
Addressing issues in a positive, positive way without misconstruing the situation, without making the situation worse. For example, the little girl that wants to put the makeup on, rather than saying, no, you cannot put the makeup on until blah, 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 she went at it at a different approach.
Right.
You're a child, you're not old enough to be wearing this, but when you're ready, we'll go and we'll buy you some.
See, that goes back to allowing the children to put things into perspective too, and allow them to be successful and not failures. So if she is taught, the little girl is taught that you're a little girl now, you're a child, at this age appropriateness, you will be able to buy some makeup, maybe a little bit at a time. You'll be able to pick out a nice pair of jeans or a nice dress that you can look very pretty in. Until that time, I'm buying them. We're going to buy them for economy. We're going to buy them because they're going to last, because you're going to tear them up. So until you stop growing, because I'm not going to buy you a $50 dress every 6 months because you're growing so fast, we'll buy something that you can grow with you as you grow. We have to teach children to be successful and to be happy and to explore and be able to take risks, to allow them to not build fences around themselves. And every family is different. How many families do you know that take their children to the library to explore the library?
I really don't know that many.
I don't know that many. I know there are kids that go to it, but they go to it for special reasons.
I know the summertime there are several parents that take their children. They have reading programs and things like that, in the summertime. But personally, to know, unless I was sitting at the library one day and watch people come in and out, I may not. I may know who they are.
Well, I know some who they are, but I don't know that many that actually go to the library, where the parents go with the intention of knocking down walls in the children. They might go there to get them to learn more about a certain topic or information, but to knock down the walls that they can become or do anything is not something parents are taught to teach their children. Young people aren't taught that, so if they're not taught that, how are they going to keep that going? Well, we got about 30 seconds left, so we're going to carry this conversation on, and the next show we have is going to be probably Early Childhood Part 3. And we're going to go into a little bit more detail on what parents can do, and I'm going to do some research on successful people that should have had walls built around them but didn't.
Several situations where walls can be built.
Yeah. And where we